Good night, good night, good night. Quick video. So, I want to talk about how people are really spiritual and how, as the Apostle Paul said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness in high places and all of that. How, in fact, life is really spiritual. It's not really that much physical. A lot of stuff that we go through, we see and feel it and experience it physically, but it's really spiritual. It's mostly spiritual, but we just are so accustomed to being in the physical. Okay? So, for example, you know, um, people have different gifts, right? Whether it be, super strength or super fast or quick thinking. Most of these, gifts that we have are spiritual. You know, some people have some unexplainable gifts. That can do some things. It's really a spirit that God puts on them, on us, that causes us to be able to do these things. And most of the time, these spirits come through our ancestors or your mother, your father, But when God talk about pronouncing blessings and curses, it's usually spiritual. Okay, you see how Samson was strong. He was strong when the Spirit of God came upon him. Okay, and became weak when the Spirit of God left him. So his strength was not physical; it was spiritual. Like you wonder how curses go on through generations. I mean, we're all flesh and blood. How does a curse follow somebody? How does karma follow somebody? It's spiritual. It's like we're templates and we look different. With us flesh and blood, but we look different. But the real deal, the real you, the real me is a spirit. It's spiritual. And different spirits in your life affect you differently. Right? We're mostly spiritual. People who have near-death experiences always talk about how the spiritual world is more real than the physical world. Right? It's like in this flesh and blood world, you're limited in understanding and in experience. When you go in the spirit, because God is spirit, and flesh and blood is less than God. God says, in Genesis how we repented, making man, how man is wicked because man is also flesh and blood. So to be flesh and blood is less than the spirit. So that's why when you die, you're liberated really, and you go into God's realm because the flesh has died. So the real you is liberated, and you get to see things how God see things and feel things how God feel things, right? But most of what we are, mainly, although we don't really have a grasp of it, mainly we are spiritual. We are the things people do, how they think, you know, they are influenced by spirits, good or bad. You ever wonder why some people can't, like when Christ was on earth, why some people could not see Christ? They couldn't. Why some people can accept Christ? Why some persons can accept certain point of views? Why some person can think a certain way? It's like they're predestined, or they're blinded. God say, people are just blinded. You know, God can open up your eyes, let you see certain things. You can close your eyes to certain things. If you serve God a certain way, He opens your eyes a certain way. He gives you a certain spirit if you serve Him a certain way. If you sin, some things are taken from you and some things are given, good or bad, right? So I think when we get to understand how, in fact, the flesh and blood it's really nothing. It's really a shell. It's really wasting away. It's really weak. It's really, not life. That is why when you die, you're going to be either with God or away from God, right? Because the real you is liberated from the flesh. The flesh is like a prison for the spirit. It's a jail for the spirit. We were meant to live forever, yes, and the flesh, the flesh, you reproduce with the flesh. God made us out of His own pleasure and put us on this planet. Put us, made us from the dirt of the planet, and left us here to, or made us to experience life, through the flesh. In a different way than He does, as we're beneath Him. But it was like you making a creation, and He gave us. We were part spirit. He breathed in us the breath of life. So we are also spiritual, right? But we had this component of the flesh, right? That now, after we sinned, we become more fleshly, more sinful, and less spiritual. We have to strive to be spiritual, and it's not easy. It's not easy to be in this world and to want to live after the flesh. That said, Apostle Paul said, "The heart is willing, but the flesh is weak." Or was that Jesus that said that? Jesus said that. Jesus said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. All right. So yeah, Jesus could fast for 40 days and 40 nights because He lived in the spirit. He could go to eating at will because He lived in the spirit. The spirit does not need food. When Moses went on top of the mountain and talked with God, he was there 40 days, 40 nights, no food. Came down, was fine. No eating, no drinking, was fine. Because life is spirit. Every single thing about us is spiritual. Everything. The way you think, your decisions, your motivations, even though you don't know it, you're doing something spiritual. You're being influenced by spirit. You're being led by spirit. Hopefully by the spirit, right? And in the end, you're going to be with spirits, either away from God or with God, who is the Father of lights. So that's why you have to forsake the flesh and the blood. Well, not the flesh and the blood. You have to forsake the flesh. The flesh and the blood. You have to forsake the flesh. Kind of sleepy. You got to forsake the flesh and live after the spirit. Walk after the spirit, not the flesh, because the flesh is loser. The flesh is, fading away. It's weak. It's decaying. It's dying. Right? You have to look after the spiritual man. Okay? How do you do that? Well, the best spirit to be around is God's spirit. Right? It's God's spirit. There are other spirits out there. Alright? The Bible said test the spirits, right? Other spirits out there. And unfortunately some of us are born with some evil spirits. It's just, your parents do some evil. Your spirits are in them. Some people get spirits from, mingling with other people, being intimate with other people, doing certain practices. You pick up spirits, right? So I know that because I've lived that. I've done good and bad, and I've experienced different spirits. I recognize in certain spirits are influencing me, right? But life is in fact, is in fact spiritual. When somebody accepts Christ, it's a spiritual transformation. It's like their eyes are opened. They see the world different. You're no longer the same. You're called out of the world when you're a Christian. You're different from the world. You just, well, getting a phone call. Jesus Christ is the Lord. Have a good night.